Now, the benchmark for world food commodity prices saw its fastest increase in 18 months in September, with quotations up for all covered commodity groups led by sugar. That's according to the Food and Agriculture Organization. Now, the FAO Food Price Index averaged 124.4 points in September, up 3% from August and 2.1% higher than its corresponding value a year earlier. Kolamasha, Chief Executive Officer of Babban Gona, joined us earlier to share some insights on the recent food price movements and food inflation trajectory in West Africa.
There are multiple factors that drive these things across the globe. If we look at within the Nigerian context, oftentimes what you find is many of these crops, the vast majority of them, come on stream during the harvest period of November, December, January. And so you see that at the period where stocks are lowest and supply is lowest, tends to be in the month of September and October, right before the new harvest comes in. So it's not uncommon. I think what we are seeing right now is just a little bit more of a dramatic movement.
Exactly. And talking about movements and also adjustments we expect, the FAO has also adjusted its 2024-2025 forecast for global rice output and trade. Now, on the back of some of the movements we've also seen and developments, Pakistan and India also lifted the ban on export of non-basmati rice just last week. For you now, how do you think this also introduces interesting dynamics or shifts in terms of the forecast here?
Well, I think that ban was originally, put in place during COVID as a preventative measure to protect their domestic food supply. I think it's well overdue being lifted. I think that's great to see. They are a relatively significant exporter into the global market, so we should see that increased supply help to moderate prices. But once again, we are already seeing quite high prices, so the moderation may be not as great as we hope.
And also looking at developments that we have on the radar as well, we're having the World Bank also express even bigger concerns over the persistent global food security threat and how this also intensifies how much pressure we are seeing on the food inflation front. Now, these definitely attributable to the pattern we've seen so far and how the crisis has been attributed to ongoing conflict in Sudan and then the Gaza Strip, which is heightening food shortages. But for you now, in terms of how we see the pattern going for Nigeria to be particular now, it's been 3 months since the government announced the food import waiver, and also interventions have come through to help reduce the cost of inputs. But if you were to assess how well the government has fared so far, the task around all year round farming, what this means, looking at production, storage and processing, value addition, would you say, how much would you say we've gotten so far up until this point, and then the task ahead as we look towards the rest of the year?
Well, I think, the government's decision to import food, kind of this emergency importation to help stem food inflation, I think really is a highlight of how serious the challenges we're facing, because I think nobody would ever agree that the way to stimulate a domestic sector is to allow importation. But thankfully, I think it's for a relatively short period of time. Hopefully that comes in and is able to have the effect that it's intended to help to moderate prices during these really peak price periods where we see in September, October. Now, I think at the end of the day, if you look at the initiatives that the government has announced, there's one key piece that has not really been addressed, and that's the piece around figuring out how to unlock significant amount of financing to the agriculture sector. It is still today, despite the fact that it's 25 to 30% of GDP by itself directly, and contributes, if you look at both the input and the output sector, about 40% of GDP and 60% of employment, it still gets 3 to 5% of formal debt. And so unless we're able to really turn that around, you're really going to struggle to see the necessary increases in productivity that we need to solve these problems.
And in terms of the fate of beating food inflation as well now, do you still remain optimistic that Nigeria can shore up its efforts as we are looking into the last quarter of this year and meeting the inflation target here?
Well, I think the reality is agriculture is not one of those sectors where you can really turn it on a dime. The reality is we are planning today in 2024 for what we need to do in 2026. And so there usually is at least a year or two lead time in many of these types of initiatives. But the reality is it can get turned around, but we're probably looking at least 18-month time period to really see significant impact of efforts made today.
Yes, I asked this because of the government out in the United Nations General Assembly and some of the promises which were made from the president's speech on October 1st as well. Now, the president promising reduction in food prices and also ease in terms of the cost of living crisis. Within this regard, some would say words are not enough and then much more concerted efforts. But if you were to itemize now near-term priorities, what would they be for the government?
So to address this issue, first and foremost, we need to solve the financing gap. So we need to learn from other markets about how they've been able to empower the private sector by getting access, enabling the private sector to go out and actually borrow at quite competitive rates. Once again, not saying subsidized rates, but competitive rates. And once that happens, then ensure that they're enabling the supply chains, enabling access to the highest quality seeds. Now that farmers have the money in their hands to buy these quality inputs, we want to make sure that they have the best quality seeds, access to all the soil health nutrients they need, fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. And I think then the knowledge that they need. In that order, you will see dramatic and rapid improvements in productivity.